Welcome to Transform, Ignite, Disrupt, bringing you interviews and insights covering proven practical strategies to unlock your company's innovation potential. Here's your host, Stephen L. Blue.
Hello, everyone. Steve Blue here, and welcome to another episode of Transform, Ignite, and Disrupt. And this is the place where I bring the best minds of the planet together to tell people and educate them and teach them on how they can transform their organizations, ignite innovation, and disrupt entire industries. And as a matter of fact, just today, how about that Amazon.com, huh? Are they unbelievable? I mean, first they ate the book business, and then they ate the music business, and they're now eating the grocery business and the television business. And just in the last several days, they announced they're buying Ring.com for $1 billion. Now, I don't know what the sales are, the profitability is in Ring.com, but holy moly, $1 billion for a company like that. It's just mind-boggling, the strategic and innovative sense of Jeff Bezos and Amazon.com. And so now they're out to transform the home security business, and no doubt they'll move, use that just as a platform to move into something else, maybe industrial security. I don't know, but it's pretty amazing what they do. If you really want a lesson on how to transform, ignite, and disrupt, Amazon.com is a great place to start. But today's guest, I'm really excited to have today's guest because he knows a thing or two about transforming, igniting, and disrupting. His name is Steve Van Valin, and he's the CEO of his own company called Culturology. And I can vouch for Steve quite a bit. I've known him for years, and he certainly helped my organization transform itself, because I've always said that if you want to be a killer company, if you want to be an innovative company, then you need to, first of all, you have to transform your organization. And you have to have what I call a culture by design, not by default. Most companies have cultures by default, and it is what it is. And, most of the times it doesn't serve them. I mean, a couple of recent examples, Wells Fargo is a great example of a toxic culture, United Airlines, Uber to some extent, and I could go on and on. They have cultures that really don't serve them, and what I call bumper sticker cultures. They look good on a boardroom wall or in an annual report, but don't really reflect what the organization's all about, and more importantly, what it needs to be. So I'd like to introduce everyone to Steve Van Valin. Steve, I'm thrilled you're here, and welcome to the show.
Steve, thanks so much for having me. What a pleasure. So looking forward to this.
Well, that's great. Why don't you just start a little bit by telling the audience, kind of what your background is. I don't remember how I met Steve. It was a long time ago. And this is kind of weird because I'm a manufacturing guy, and Steve used to be a QVC network guy, which is a behemoth, a cultural and an innovative behemoth. People thought I was crazy when I asked Steve to come in and teach my organization, cultural values and innovation, all that. They couldn't imagine how, a television network guy could add anything to a manufacturing guy. But as a matter of fact, he did. And he has lessons that can be learned by all of us. So Steve, why don't you just tell the audience a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. So, my background originally was sales and marketing, and I had an opportunity back in 1997 to join QVC, believe it or not, for the second time. But this time they're looking for people to come in and help transform the culture. So they had just gone through a huge renaissance at QVC, and a new CEO had come on board, and we're really looking to get back to what made QVC great in the first place, which is really about the culture that we had as entrepreneurs back in the early days, and then to live out a more contemporized brand experience that we were building for our customers. So when I came on board with that, it was totally new, uncharted territory for me. But I just fell in love with it, and just like you, Steve, have always been convicted on my own that how important that environment was for me personally. Could see the difference in my performance when I was in a great culture where I felt respected and had the ability to collaborate. My performance went off the chart, and I felt really confident and good about myself, obviously, which is a wonderful benefit, and then the opposite being true as well, a toxic environment leading to a lot of stress and effort and not such great performance. So to come on to QVC and be able to learn this from the ground up and then be able to proliferate it to 10,000 employees was a real amazing journey over 14 years, and ended up leading the culture there. And, really as a competitive advantage, I know that, that's part of what you're doing with this podcast is really talking about, disruption and, to create a competitive advantage. And that's the way we looked at it at QVC. And it truly was highly effective. So I went out on my own. It's been 7 years now with Culturology to help clients of all sizes do something similar and leveraging my strengths and my passion for this discipline.
Well, when you take the 30,000-foot view, I'm sure you find some similarities between. I always tell people, if you're going to, ignite innovation and disrupt industries and all that, you have to first, understand, you have to transform your culture from whatever it is to what it needs to be. And I bet at the 30,000-foot level, you see similarities between cultures as they are, and then you take a look at, well, here's what it needs to be successful. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, really, if a company or an organization looks at any strategic initiative that they have in front of them, I mean, that could be as black and white as a pricing increase, or implementing a new CRM, or launching into a new market, or like in Miller Ingenuity's case, launching into an entirely new product line. All of those initiatives have to pass through what they call the jaws of culture. So you may be able to execute it even if you have a poor culture, but man, the amount of flesh and blood and everything that it takes to go through the transactional costs of doing business together is so significant, and inevitably the execution piece, the ability to get it done, and the cost involved are always higher with a less than stellar culture. So great cultures, I like to say, are able to execute together and then deliver on the brand promise. So that affects everything that you're doing internally. The ability to execute is the most common thing that really plays a part in impacting.
Well, the jaws of cultures, it's a nice phrase. I like that because it is a jaw of culture, and many CEOs don't even realize the kind of culture they have, and the ones that maybe even do think culture is for this squishy, free beer and pizza for a lunch crowd. Do you find it hard to convince CEOs, and when you consult with them about, paying attention to this culture thing? Because it's really not hard stuff. I mean, I don't mean hard stuff. It's a very difficult thing to do, as you know, but it's not, scientific. It's not quantifiable. It's not, on the balance sheet.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that actually a tipping point has happened. I mean, there's still some old school folks that don't quite get it, and they probably never will. Those convinced against their will are of the same opinion still, and somehow they're still in business, but they're probably really struggling to grow as it becomes more competitive. But I think that we have a whole nother generation, the millennials, which have changed everything in terms of demanding culture. That demand has created a supply of good cultures, and people knowing that they're in a talent war for millennials and now Gen Z, which is graduating from college and entering the workforce, that if you don't have your culture act together, they're going somewhere else, because they know, they're more savvy than any generation before, that culture is something that really has an impact on them. And I've been to enough schools and visited enough marketing classes and psychology classes to realize that, when I talk to those kids, that they are way more articulate about it. So I think that, to answer your question, Steve, I think that the tipping point is happening, or maybe it's happening right now, but that the new leaders get culture a lot faster than it used to be because of the generational thing.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I talk to people about this all the time, especially people my age. I'm a baby boomer, and baby boomer CEOs tend to think that this Generation X ought to do like them and think like them and be like them, and it just ain't ever going to happen. And you can't dismiss them, and you can't ignore them, and you have to find a way to be productively engaged with them. My son's a perfect example. He's 26, and he works for a big software company. The name escapes me at the moment. I was talking to him last night. I said, so what's on the agenda tomorrow? And he said, oh, well, we're going to do a team building thing from noon to 3. We're all going to play some electronic game somewhere. So the whole IT team's going to go off and play an electronic game as a team building exercise. And most baby boomer CEO would say, you got to be kidding me. That's a waste of time and money.
Yeah, I think that all the rules have to be tossed out as to what's appropriate anymore in terms of building relationships. I think if you can build relationships from playing an electronic game with each other and having some laughs and getting to know each other a little bit about, letting your hair down and getting to know each other personally, that inevitably leads to better rapport, and that leads to better respect in the way you do business together. So I think the rules, in a sense, have been tossed out. I will say this, though, Steve, that I think that a lot of organizations, that they're almost taking the bait too quickly on what I call the symbols of culture without what's underneath that, and that's the substance of culture. So I'll give you an example of the symbols of culture, which are some of the things that maybe your son's experiencing. And my son is 23 and works for, a hipster company and, in the city. And, so the symbols are the cool open office space, the interesting rewards programs, bring your dog to work, roll out the beer cart at 4:00 in the afternoon. Things like that, putting the ping pong table in the break room and doing, events together that are kind of like off the chart, cool and interesting and creative. Those are wonderful symbols. I mean, I'm not, disparaging them, but I think sometimes people realize that, or they don't realize that that's not the whole picture. They need to have the substance underneath that, and that's the good old-fashioned hard work of building relationships together. It's about leadership development. It's about training. It's about taking your values or your fundamentals and really exploring what those look like in action and why that matters to the business, so that people can make a connection between, hey, I work for Miller Ingenuity. What is our purpose in doing this work? Why are we actually putting an emphasis on innovation? And when people make that substantive connection, that, I think, is just as important and overrides the symbols of culture, if I describe that properly.
Yeah, I understand exactly what you mean. It's easy to reach for the symbol, but it's hard to reach for the substance, isn't it?
Yeah, I met with a CEO a couple of months ago who called me in to, they know that they needed to work on their culture because they were losing good talent. And I, of course, asked some just regular benign questions like, so tell me some things that you've done here to work on the culture. And he said, well, we put in a new coffee machine, and we have potluck on Friday, every Friday after, for lunchtime, people bring in foods together. And I said, okay, great. What else? And that's kind of where he stopped. And, he was a young guy, a really smart, savvy person, but that was his impression of what culture was supposed to be about. And so it was a real opportunity to say, well, these are good things, but we need to add the discipline and rigor. If culture is a competitive advantage, then it's just like Lean or Six Sigma or self-directed teams. It has a discipline underneath it that needs to be executed. So those are the things that we talked about and started to implement there.
Now, that's a good point, the disciplines and the rigor of culture. And whenever I talk to another CEO or I give a keynote speech or whatever, they want to know, well, how long is this culture thing going to take? I mean, can we get this done like in 6 months? I said, you're talking about multi-years. You're talking about, but maybe a decade. I know in my own company, Miller Ingenuity, our culture, and you were with us for most of it, and we're not done with it. I mean, we have to continue to improve it and work on it and all that. I said, if you're not ready for a 10-year journey, then you should not even think about this.
Yeah, no, I agree. Here's a sort of a metaphor that might relate to that. So I always think of culture, it's not salvation. In other words, it's not one and done. It's sanctification. It's the daily work that builds that foundation that keeps on growing. And if you ignore your culture, it's just kind of like a garden. Here's another metaphor. If you ignore your garden, the weeds start growing, and then you get invasive plants and bugs and insects and whatever. You have to keep tending your garden, your culture garden. Otherwise, it'll go out of control. And I'm not trying to be a pessimist about people in general, but when you put people in a work environment, they're naturally dysfunctional. Okay. And I'm not being a wise guy here, but in other words, if you don't work on it, the dysfunction will eventually take over, because that's just sort of our humanity expressing itself in a bad form. So you do have to keep working on it. It's sanctification.
I couldn't agree more. And one of the things I write about and talk about is teamwork. And teamwork is everybody wants teamwork. Teamwork. That's the thing to be, thing to have. And I always say, well, if teamwork is such a great thing, why do so few organizations do it? And then I say, the thing you have to understand about teamwork, and this is to your point, Steve, teamwork is not a natural act in organizations, because most organizations stack the deck against teamwork, whether incentive plans and their individual compensation and individual performance appraisal programs, and you have to throw out the old rules. And, if you really want teamwork, you have to create the culture in the organization that supports it and enhances it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. When you go back to the egg, go back to the original egg of culture, it's looking at the beliefs that people have, and because the beliefs will predict exactly what the behavior that stems from that. So until you get people to really believe that teamwork is a valued commodity here in this company, and that they can make the connection with why this makes a difference in the company's success and also their own ability to succeed, until they believe that, they're probably not going to exhibit the behavior that resembles really solid, legitimate, respectful teamwork, collaborative teamwork.
That's exactly right. Beliefs drive behavior. When you, just to take a slight detour, when you come into a company, and you're welcome to use mine as an example if you want, a CEO calls you like I did, and I said, Steve, I need a better culture, I need more innovation, all that. How do I do that? Where do you start?
Yeah, I really look at it, Steve, as a sort of a 3-step process where we identify the current state, identify where the company is. Everybody has a culture, whether they like it or not. So identifying where they are. And then secondly, to articulate what is the culture that we want to have to succeed in our business goals. It has to be connected to business goals. It can't just be culture for culture's sake, because that's not sustainable. You want to connect it to the business goals. So the articulation piece, and that would be, for me, I have my own methodology I call the culture narrative. And the culture narrative answers the who, what, when, where, why, and how of your culture. And so each one of those 5 W's and the H is connected to what I call leading principles. So the leading principles would be the brand is who you are as a company. The vision is where you're going, so people understand where we're headed, what's our future, what's our destination. The purpose answers the why question. Why do we work hard here? Why, inevitably the passion behind the business. The values are your how you work together. And then strategically, a mission, which is kind of like a military mission, is the what's and the whens. These are more of the strategic initiative level things that typically I don't need to go in and work with them on. They already have those planned out. But it's the deliverables and when that timestamp is of when they're going to do it. So step one, identify where they are. Step two, articulate that culture narrative that I just described. And then thirdly, and this is where you have the roll up your sleeves time, it's integrate. How do you integrate that? How do you tell the story over and over and over again and build rituals within the organization where people, their beliefs change in a positive way so that the behaviors are exhibited. So that can manifest itself in many, many different ways, training, looking at the way people are meeting together, all the synapses of where culture lives and dies, which is, in those conversations that people are having, both formally and informally. One of the things I love that you were able to implement at Miller Ingenuity were the Toolbox Meetings. That was one of the things we identified early on where we said, wow, this is really an important culture experience that happens every day when the teams come together and look at the work that's in front of them. Let's turn those into brainstorming sessions. And so those are the type of opportunities that people have to say, how are people meeting? And how might we change that structure to be, to resemble the culture that we want that's going to drive performance? So that's the integration piece. So identify, articulate, and then integrate.
Well, that's, it's all really important. And speaking of our Toolbox Meetings that you helped us turn into brainstorming meetings, just to give my audience a little example of how this process sort of integrates and self-sustains. We used to have, and you know this, Steve, we used to say to our employees, okay, we want you to meet at a certain place at a certain time and work on a certain problem and brainstorm and all that, and then tell us when you're done. And now they decide where they're going to meet. They decide when they're going to meet. They marshal their own resources to bring about a result based on what they've learned and brainstormed. And it all happens automatically. It's like after a while, but this is a number of years, as you know, Steve, it's magic once you get it incorporated into the culture.
Wow. So, if I could ask you a question on that, what do you think helped change their beliefs and behavior on that over time? Because that sounds like a huge transformation.
Well, it'd be a couple of things. It has to start at the top. At the top, as you know, a CEO can't just say, I want innovation and, just go make it happen. Then he drops off the radar screen. He's never heard from again. He has to provide the time, the space, and the resources and the encouragement to do that. And a couple of things we did is, I said to employees, I expect every one of you to spend 20% of your time brainstorming on stuff.
Yeah.
Well, that's no good if then you say, but you better be sure that you get the donuts done today. You have to, so I hired basically extra 20% of people, so that provided the time for people to do it. And as you know, at some point in time, I spent $500,000 creating what, as you know, is called our creation station. I put $500,000 into a high technology space designed and to facilitate thought and teamwork and so forth. And they're welcome to come back there anytime they want. Anytime they feel like they want to go and brainstorm, they don't have to ask some boss. They just kind of go. And so I provided the space for it, and I provided the tools for it and the time for it. And then it just sort of, over time, it just took. And that'd be the advice I'd give to any CEO is just don't make a declaration. Don't give it to your HR department. Make sure you provide the time, the tools, and the space for people to be innovative.
Yeah. Well, I think that the creation station is the ultimate fusion of symbols and substance, because it's a symbol. It shows that you putting your money where your mouth is in terms of innovation and giving respect back to the employees in this amazing space in the middle of a factory, essentially. And then the substance is the ability to brainstorm with each other there, having that as a discipline that they've learned and now execute on in the space. So it's not just a romper room. It's really a productive room. So.
And speaking of romper room, if you're a CEO listening to this out there, you're going to get a lot of criticism from others around you, and maybe your board and your shareholders are going to say, "What the hell did you spend all that money in a romper room for? Where's the beef? Where's the beef? Where's the beef?" So you're always going to have to defend that. And the fact of the matter is, in any cultural innovation effort, and certainly in mine, I could point to a couple of really big things that happened as a result of the effort, but there's a million small things that happen every day, and I don't even know what they are, and I don't need to know what they are. So my advice to CEOs would be just be ready to defend it, because most people on a board will go, "This is a ridiculous waste of space and time. Just tell them to get back to work."
Yeah, I think in the manufacturing industry too, that's in a very much a talent war for millennials, that you really need to be able to tell that story to them to attract those really smart minds that now have choices. Why do they want to come and work for you? First of all, showing them that space is impressive in and of itself, but then showing them what transpires there and their ability to collaborate with others and to have a voice in the company and to really be able to make a difference. That's what gets a 22-year-old engineer, really excited about coming there. And your competition hopefully is not doing that, and they're gonna join your firm and make a difference in your success. So it's a competitive stroke.
It is, and that's a good point, because I can't outspend my competition on wages and benefits, and at the end of the day, as you know, wages and benefits are not satisfiers; they're dissatisfiers, and so you can't level the playing field that way. If you want to attract the best and the brightest, you have to have an environment that attracts them, and that's what I would encourage every CEO to do. Say, Steve, I don't want to take up any more of your time, but how can, if my audience wants to hear more from you, and perhaps even have you come in and talk to them about, your consulting and so forth, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, my website is culturologyusa.com, so that would be a great place to take a look. And Steve, I have some. I'd love to provide people with some free tools that they can do sort of rapid fire analysis. And so I have a high-performing culture gap analysis that if they want to contact me, I'd be happy to send it out. It's something that they could administer, even themselves with their senior team, just to find out, hey, where are we and where might we need to focus to gain a competitive advantage from a cultural perspective. So there. And as you know, I'm a creative guy, so I'd love to talk to anybody about where they are and what the possibilities are for how to tackle this enormous challenge of shaping a great high performing culture. So they can welcome to reach out to me, on the phone or email or LinkedIn even. So happy to talk with folks.
Well, that's great, and I'd encourage everybody out there listening to that to at least do that. And I think you'll find the free tools are probably worth paying for, but you should take advantage of them. And I'd like to thank my guest, Steve Van Valin today, the CEO of Culturology, for just a terrific half hour, 40 minutes on what people can do to raise the bar on their culture and become more competitive. And stay tuned for the next episode of Transform, Ignite, and Disrupt, because I'm going to bring a car guy on the show who disrupted the rail industry, and I think you'll find that pretty fascinating. So hang on to your seatbelts, and we'll see you on the next episode.
You've been listening to Transform, Ignite, Disrupt. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit StephenLBlue.com.